Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, the second wife, the first to be executed. Most people remember the rhyme, divorced, beheaded, died. But what you don't hear in those schoolhouse chants is the true scale of horror that unfolded when Anne Boleyn was sentenced to die. They tell you it was quick, dignified, a French swordsman, a clean cut, but peel back the sanitized legend and what you find isn't mercy, it's a psychological operation wrapped in velvet and blood. A royal execution staged like a grotesque ballet designed to shatter a woman's mind, her legacy, and her very identity. Because what happened to Anne Boleyn in May of 1536 wasn't just the end of a queen, it was the performance of a public destruction, calculated by a king who once loved her and now wanted to erase her. She was imprisoned in the Tower of London, the very place she had once entered in triumph. Crowned and exalted, now she stared at the same walls from a cold, damp cell, and she waited for 17 days. But she didn't just wait. They told her she would die, then delayed the execution, then told her again, then delayed it again. Each morning she woke wondering, is this the last day I breathe? Each night she lay down knowing no one will tell me when it ends. That wasn't mercy, that was psychological torture. You don't learn this in history classes out there, but repeated execution delays were a known tactic to break a prisoner's resolve. Anne's final hours weren't peaceful. They were dissociative. Her composure was mistaken for grace, but it was more likely a shutdown, a complete emotional retreat, the only defense left for a woman abandoned by everyone, even her own father. And when the day finally came, May 19th, 1536, it wasn't a quiet affair. It was a spectacle. The scaffold was intentionally low to the ground, forcing Anne to physically lower herself before the crowd, before the state, before the world that now judged her. The courtyard wasn't silent, but charged, almost carnival-like. There were whispers, curiosity, jesting. Anne stood in a plain gray dress. No royal crimson, no jewels, no crown. She was not allowed to face her accusers, but she was ordered to speak to the crowd, to confess, to bless the king, to accept the justice that had been delivered. She did. She praised Henry, not because she meant it, but because the scaffold wasn't just for execution. It was for propaganda, and she knew the cost of defiance even in death. They had brought in a French swordsman not out of compassion, but for drama. He stood behind her, out of sight. Anne knelt, hands trembling, unsure of when the blow would fall. She had been blindfolded not to protect her from the blade, but so she wouldn't flinch, so the strike would land clean, so she would submit perfectly. And then a whistle, not a count, not a warning, just a signal. The sword swept, fast and final. Her head landed in straw. Her body collapsed sideways. And the crowd gasped and moved on. But that wasn't the end. Because for Henry VIII, execution wasn't enough. He needed Anne erased. They charged her with adultery, incest, treason lurid, fabricated offenses that made her execution not just necessary, but righteous. They destroyed her portraits, scraped her initials from the palace walls, removed her crest, her emblems, even speaking her name became dangerous. You don't learn this in history classes out there, but after Anne's death, even coins that bore her image were melted. Her sister-in-law was forced to hand over every piece of jewelry Anne had touched. Her servants were reassigned, her allies exiled, her daughter Elizabeth was declared illegitimate. Anne wasn't just killed, she was ritually unmade. The goal wasn't justice, it was erasure. And yet, even in death, Anne Boleyn remained a threat. Because the horror didn't end with the sword. It lingered in the aftermath, haunting the court, infecting the air, settling in the hearts of those who witnessed her final hours. Her ladies-in-waiting, those few women allowed to remain with her in the tower, were forced to assist with her burial, not in a royal tomb, not even in a prepared coffin. Anne's body was placed in an arrow chest, a wooden box meant to hold weapons, not queens. Her head was wrapped in linen, her body folded inside. And her women, they carried her. Hands that once brushed her hair now held her severed remains. There were no hymns, no bells, no mourning aloud, just silence and the realization that if Anne could be destroyed like this, so could anyone. You don't learn this in history classes out there, but several of her attendants later reported lifelong trauma. Some refused to serve at court again. One fell into spiritual hysteria, convinced she would be next. Because when you watch your queen be butchered, when you're the one holding her skull, you don't forget. And neither did her daughter. Elizabeth was only 2 years old when her mother was killed, too young to remember the day, but old enough to live the consequences. Her status was stripped, she was declared illegitimate, removed from the line of succession, treated as a royal inconvenience. No one dared speak of her mother, no portraits, no stories, just a void and erasure designed to suffocate both mother and child under silence. But the ghost of Anne Boleyn was not so easily buried. You don't learn this in history classes out there, but Elizabeth, once she became queen, wore a ring with a hidden compartment. Inside, a tiny portrait herself on one side and Anne on the other. The daughter they tried to erase carried her mother's memory on her finger. And there's one final horror one people often misread as compassion. The swordsman. He is often described as an act of mercy brought from Calais for a quicker death, but mercy was never Henry's intention. The sword was a spectacle, a foreign flair, something to heighten the drama. English executions used an axe. It was symbolic, familiar, public, but Henry chose a foreign executioner with a silent blade not for Anne's comfort, but to shock the audience, to twist the knife, to make sure her death felt different, exotic, othered. And the blindfold, it didn't shield her, it controlled her. Without it, Anne might flinch, move, cause the swordsman to miss. And that wouldn't do. Not for the king's production. She had to die perfectly still, like a prop in a play that ends in blood. Calculated cruelty, disguised as grace. But even with all this, Henry wasn't finished. Because the true horror of Anne Boleyn's death isn't just what happened to her body, but what happened to the truth. Henry moved fast. The official accounts praised his generosity, said Anne was treated fairly, that she had confessed, that justice was served. You don't learn this in history classes out there, but the chroniclers who wrote about Anne's final days were paid by the crown. Dissenting accounts were destroyed, letters intercepted, and in time the real story faded, replaced by a sanitized tale of a guilty queen who got what she deserved. But the truth was far more horrifying. Anne was executed not just as a traitor, but as a warning. Her death was used to cement a king's authority, reinforce a tyrant's will, and prove that even queens could bleed when they defied a godlike husband. She was the crown's scapegoat, its sacrifice, and its silenced voice. So now you know. Anne Boleyn didn't die clean. She didn't die quickly. She didn't die justly. She died under the weight of a system designed to destroy her completely from her body, to her memory, to her bloodline. But even in that silence, she left behind echoes. A daughter who would rule, a legacy that would rise from the scaffold, and a warning that absolute power doesn't just kill, it rewrites reality. Subscribe if you want more of history's darkest secrets, real stories scrubbed from textbooks, whitewashed by power, and stitched back together only by those brave enough to look beneath the blade. Next time, the queen who bathed in blood and the chambermaids who knew the truth.